In the summer of 1795, Britain was rocked by a series of protests and riots, many of which were led by working-class women. Dubbed the Revolt of the Housewives, the women were protesting high food prices and severe food shortages across the country. And understanding their protests helps us come to terms with the idea of the moral economy. A variety of underlying conditions sparked the protests. A hot, dry summer in 1794, followed by an exceptionally cold winter in 1795, and then extensive spring flooding, led to an extremely poor wheat harvest. At the same time, Britain was at war with revolutionary France. That war disrupted Britain's trade and led the government to purchase large quantities of wheat to supply the army and navy, reducing the available supply for the civilian population. And remember, this is all occurring at the same time as the ongoing process of enclosure, the privatization of common land, which had traditionally been used as pasture for grazing animals, collecting firewood, and other activities, and the dismantling of the poor law system, which provided limited relief for the poor, both of which were fueling social tensions and vulnerability, especially among the rural poor and the growing urban working class. The scarcity of food led to steep increases in the price of bread and other essentials. For many working-class families, this meant severe hardship, as their wages did not keep pace with the rising cost of living. There were also widespread accusations of merchants and farmers hoarding grain and speculation driving up prices, which fueled public anger. The protests and riots began in the spring of 1795 and reached their peak that summer, spreading to most major cities across the country. While the protests often started peacefully, they sometimes turned violent. But the strategies employed by the protesting women highlight the moral claims they were making. Protesters targeted the middlemen, the millers, bakers, and merchants that they blamed for hoarding grain and artificially inflating prices. They sought to force the redistribution of available food stocks, seizing bread, grain, and other food where they found it, and distributing it to the needy but paying what they felt was a just or fair price for the seized food to its original owner. In the end, the protests were quelled by a combination of repression and reform by the government. In some cases, local magistrates temporarily fixed prices or distributed relief to placate the rioters, but these measures were often short-lived and insufficient to address the underlying issues. More frequently, the government resorted to force, deploying militia and troops to quell disturbances, and arrested, tried, and issued harsh punishment for the rioters. But the protests also sparked a national debate over food policy and public welfare, centered on the nature of the market, the proper role of state regulation, and the impact of historical or customary protections, a debate which E.P. Thompson argues centered on the idea of the moral economy. The moral economy encompasses two distinct elements. The first element derives from the work of E.P. Thompson himself. Through his analysis of the Revolt of the Housewives and other similar movements during the transition to capitalism, Thompson concluded that the moral economy drew on customary rights, the norms, values, and beliefs that legitimate economic decisions and actions. His focus on the idea of just prices is an example of this. From Thompson's perspective, economic actions are not purely rational or self-interested, but are influenced by deeply held social values and expectations. The legitimacy of economic practices, including pricing, working conditions, and labor practices, access to resources, and so on, were judged not just by efficiency or profitability, but by adherence to community norms and ethical standards. Protest and resistance thus arise when there is a perceived violation of these moral and community standards, reflecting a collective sense of injustice and a demand for moral rectification. It's thus a broad conception of social justice and community solidarity. Violations of these customary rights through price gouging or exploitation were seen as moral transgressions that justified collective action, protest, and resistance. In other words, the protests were not merely reactions to economic hardship or hunger, but were equally driven by moral outrage against perceived injustices in the marketplace. The second element of moral economy derives from the work of the Hungarian political economist Karl Polanyi, whose classic book The Great Transformation explored the transition from pre-capitalist to capitalist economic systems, or in his terms, from pre-market to market societies. Broadly speaking, Polanyi argued that in pre-market societies, economic activities were embedded in broader social, cultural, and political relations. Production and consumption were not considered separate from other aspects of life, but were intertwined with broader social obligations, religious beliefs, community norms, and custom and tradition. In such societies, systems of reciprocity or mutual exchange and redistribution through, for example, the centralized collection and distribution of resources, rather than market-driven exchanges, predominated, helping to maintain social cohesion and ensuring the needs of the community and its members were met. But during the transition from pre-market to market societies, economic activities became increasingly disembedded from social relations, ultimately leading to the rise of self-regulating markets. The disembedding of the economy required a reconceptualization of land, money, and labor into what Polanyi calls fictitious commodities, treating them as commodities for sale on the market and ignoring their broader non-commodity form. After all, land is just nature by another term, and labor are people. According to Polanyi, only when market forces determine the price and thus the value of these items by treating them as commodities for sale on the market, a process Polanyi refers to as the commodity fiction, can liberal capitalism begin to emerge. As Polanyi himself observes in The Great Transformation,
to allow the market mechanism to be sole director of the fate of human beings and their natural environment would result in the demolition of society. Robbed of the protective covering of cultural institutions, human beings would perish from the effects of social exposure. They would die as the perish from the effects of social exposure. They would die as the victims of acute social dislocation through vice, perversion, crime, and starvation. Nature would be reduced to its elements, neighborhoods and landscapes defiled, rivers polluted, military safety jeopardized, the power to produce food and raw materials destroyed. No society could stand the effects of such a system of crude fictions, even for the shortest stretch of time, unless its human and natural substance, as well as its business organization, was protected against the ravages of this satanic mill.
As a result, people tended to resist this dislocation, especially during the transition from pre-market to market societies, when the memories of the social limits on the market were still fresh in their minds. Thus, while both Polanyi and Thompson's concept of moral economy emphasize the importance of social norms and values in shaping economic behavior, they focus on different aspects and contexts. Thompson's analysis focuses on the cultural and moral foundations for economic actions, while Polanyi is more interested in understanding the ways in which economic systems are embedded or disembedded in broader social relations. As a result, Thompson's analysis tends to focus more directly on the micro level of individual or social movement action, while Polanyi tends to focus more on the broad macro level transitions between economic systems. The context of their analyses also differs slightly, with Thompson interested in studying any society in which economic grievances arise. As a result, Thompson's framework has informed studies on topics as varied as the hunger riots in Chile, labor protests in Egypt, corruption in Nigeria, entrepreneur behavior in Nepal, healthcare in Britain, alcoholism among the Navajo, AIDS in South Africa, racial disparities in health incomes in the United States, embryonic stem cells in Europe, file sharing on the internet, and countless others. Polanyi, on the other hand, is interested in the origins of capitalism and the transition from pre-market to market societies. That said, Polanyi's work has also been widely cited and provides the foundation for numerous similar studies on the expansion of capitalism to countries around the world. Finally, Thompson's work helps us understand the role of moral beliefs in shaping economic behavior, emphasizing the importance of cultural and moral frameworks for action. Think of the just prices paid during the Revolt of the Housewives we explored earlier. Polanyi, on the other hand, challenges the universality of market economies and the idea that market-based economies are natural or universal. He emphasizes the way in which protest and political action seek to re-embed the economy into broader social relations, a process he refers to as the double movement. But what exactly does all this have to do with understanding our contemporary food system? A lot, actually. Thompson's moral economy can help us understand how people's perceptions of fairness and justice in the food system often derive from protest and activism. Rising food prices often trigger protests, especially when they're seen as unjust or exploitative. People may demand price controls, subsidies, or increases in food distribution programs to ensure access to affordable food. We saw such popular protests in India, South Africa, and elsewhere following the 2007-2008 global food crisis, again in the 2012 food crisis, and again still during the post-COVID inflationary period in countries ranging from India and Iran to South Africa and Brazil, among others. And even consumer-based movements like those promoting fair trade or locally grown foods might be seen in the context of calls for greater fairness and justice in the food system, making moral claims on economic activity. Thompson's work also helps us understand how cultural values and beliefs shape our food system. For example, protests against the loss of traditional foodways or the imposition of foreign diets can be seen as an expression of cultural identity and resistance to homogenization, a topic we explored in an earlier video. Similarly, conflicts over food labeling or the availability of certain foods are often driven by religious beliefs and dietary laws or other cultural values. Anne Polanyi's idea of embedded and disembedded economies reminds us that the food system is not just about market forces, but is deeply embedded in social relations, environmental concerns, and public health. Polanyi's critique of the self-regulating market highlights the unintended consequences of promoting market logic in the food system. Examples of this might include the ways in which the pursuit of short-term profits can lead to shortcuts in food safety, leading to outbreaks of foodborne illnesses, or how industrial agriculture's focus on maximizing yields can lead to soil depletion, water pollution, and the loss of biodiversity, all topics we explore in greater detail in other videos. And in response, a number of social movements have emerged, part of what Polanyi terms the double movement, to challenge the disembedding of the food system and seeking to re-embed the food economy into broader social relations. The fair trade movement, which harkens back to the idea of just prices, seeks to ensure that farmers receive a price for their products that permits not just their survival, but often benefits the community as well. Food sovereignty and food justice movements, which advocate for local control over food production and distribution, are often framed as a way to prioritize local community needs and challenge corporate dominance of the food system. And the push for sustainable agriculture highlights the environmental and social impacts of industrial agriculture, seeking to re-embed farming into more sustainable and localized food systems. All of these might be seen as examples of Polanyi's double movement in the context of food and farming. Thus, by drawing on Polanyi and Thompson's frameworks, we can gain a more comprehensive understanding of contemporary food politics. We can see how people's moral outrage over perceived injustices in the food systems, a la Thompson, can lead to protests and demands for alternative systems that prioritize social and ecological values over pure market logic, a la Polanyi. We can analyze how cultural values and norms shape people's food choices and activism, while also recognizing the structural constraints of the global food system. And by understanding the complex interplay of moral values, cultural beliefs, and economic forces, we can better frame the challenges and opportunities for creating a more just and sustainable food system. More broadly, differentiating between a moral economy and a market economy offers some insights into the nature and functioning of, and perhaps even the possibilities within, our global food system. And we can differentiate between them in a few ways. A moral economy prioritizes social justice, equity, sustainability, and community well-being. It seeks to align economic activities with ethical values and social responsibilities. Market economies, on the other hand, focus on profit maximization, efficiency, and growth. It emphasizes the importance of competition and innovation to drive economic progress. In a moral economy, exchange relies on reciprocity, community support, and redistribution to ensure that all members have access to food. Examples include cooperatives, community-supported agriculture, food kitchens, or food sharing initiatives. A market economy operates through the price mechanism and market transactions. Food is bought and sold based on supply and demand, with prices adjusting to reflect market conditions. Moral economies tend to value the social relationships and cultural traditions embedded in food production and consumption. Market economies tend to prioritize impersonal market transactions over social relationships and cultural considerations. As a result, it tends to be more disembedded from broader social relations. Moral economies usually operate on a local or regional scale, emphasizing the importance of local food systems and community-based practices. It seeks to shorten supply chains and build resilience within communities. Market economies, on the other hand, tend to have longer supply chains functioning on a global scale with extensive trade networks and complex supply chains which aim to optimize production and distribution on an international level, often at the expense of local systems. Finally, during times of food crises, moral economies emphasize mutual aid, solidarity, and community resilience. Responses are often collective and aimed at ensuring the well-being of all community members. By contrast, market economies rely on market adjustments and governmental interventions to stabilize prices and supply chains. Responses may prioritize economic stability and recovery over immediate social needs. In reality, of course, the global food system is neither solely a moral economy nor solely a market one. It's a complex mix of both, with varying degrees of influence in different regions and contexts. While the market economy dominates the global food system, there's a growing movement towards moral economy principles as initiatives like fair trade, community-supported agriculture, and food sovereignty movements are gaining traction, challenging the dominance of market logic and advocating for more just and sustainable food systems. But that's it for now. Please leave any questions you have in the comments section below, and as always, thanks for watching. Bye.